I'm delighted that Bruce Daisley, VP, Vice President of Twitter, is here to join us today. I saw Bruce speak last year and was seriously impressed by him. So much so that I've lashed out and I bought many copies of his book. So if we get some intelligent questions, the last example I gave you is not an intelligent question, then I'm sure he'd be delighted to sign some personal copies of the book. It's absolutely fantastic read either way. So the joy of work, please have a look at that. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I suppose that the first question from me to Bruce is that, so this Twitter thing, I mean, do you think it'll really catch on?
So it's probably worth me giving a context of why I'm here,
Yes.
right? So my day job is, my very demanding day job is I work at Twitter, sort of helping build our reputation, revenue and sort of audience across Europe and the Middle East and Africa. But through doing that job, I witnessed what I think is a sort of incredibly common modern affliction of modern work, which was team burnout. I was witnessing burnout of the people who work with us from the pressure of being always on, of being constantly connected to devices. You might think there's some irony in that, but I was witnessing that firsthand. And I, as a person responsible, having seen what people were capable of doing in our office was always regarded as the best office for Twitter, globally, internationally. I set about thinking, how could I change it? And I started doing a podcast, which was sort of my act of subversion, I think, in the first instance, contacting experts. It became very clear very quickly that bosses didn't have the answers. So I used to go and meet CEOs of companies, and they'd tell me about their culture, and it would ring insincere. You know, human beings have got narrative fallacy. We love telling a story that makes things make sense. And then I would go and meet psychologists and people who studied these things. And I very quickly started learning, wow, there's lots of ways we can make work better. So that's how I sort of ended up here. I was trying to make interventions to fix my work, to get back to being a positive, highly productive work culture. And sort of through that, I met loads of people who knew how to do it.
And so why have you arrived at that sort of conclusion that, you know, modern work is actually a lie? Could you expand on that a little?
Yeah, because there's a lot of things that run through modern work which are just falsehoods that are just convenient that we go through and we persist with. The most obvious lie in modern work is meetings. Meetings are sort of this remarkable pyramid sales scheme, I think, that we're convinced that like if someone said, describe your working week, no doubt most of us would say, describe the average for British people, British office workers, is 16 hours a week in meetings. And I think if a child was to transplant into your brain during those 16 hours a week of meetings, they'd immediately remark to you, wow, 16 hours a week of meetings, and you don't really pay much attention in them, right? We're in these, except our own meetings, we're convinced, it's like children, babies, we're convinced our own meetings are good, and everyone else's meetings are atrocious. And but here's the strange thing about meetings, is we're convinced that the meetings we're not in is where the good shit happens. So if someone says to you, we're all just going to have a quick meeting, the big boss is coming, and you immediately feel like your human rights have been deprived, that why aren't I at that meeting? Or if you've ever been promoted, had the good fortune of being promoted, one of the things that comes with promotion clearly is a degree of extra money, but it's also, right, I'm now going to the Monday afternoon meeting. And you head into the Monday afternoon meeting thinking some truth bombs are about to be dropped, like revelations are about to be tumbling out of the PowerPoint. And you quickly realise this is as bad as all the other meetings. And so modern work is a lie. And we choose, because there's so much about meetings that's about status, so much about meetings are about our position in the hierarchy, that we choose not to see the meetings for what they are, but we see them for what they're pretending to be.
So where do the best meetings sort of take place in your experience then?
So the first thing I'll say is that quite often Silicon Valley firms, and I say this, I worked at Google for 4 years now, Twitter for 8 years, Silicon Valley firms try to present that they have the answers on technology, on work, on the future, and it's misdirection. It's a total illusion. But I guess because these are some of the biggest brands that we see around us now, we're surrounded with these big technology brands, we can't help but be drawn by the magnetic allure. We're convinced they must have the answers. But there are some things that you pluck out, and there are some sort of diamonds in the coal mine. I am fascinated with Amazon have got a culture, which is you only have meetings if you need to make a decision. And so they don't allow PowerPoint in any meetings at Amazon, because they say PowerPoint is basically performative. It suits extroverts. It actually suits men. Men generally give a bit more BS in meetings than women, and they pretend that they know what they're talking. In history, no one's read the pre-read, right? I think we all know that. You get a 90-page document beforehand. Where you're meant to find the time to read this with full attention is one of the unsolved mysteries of work. But so Amazon say, right, here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn up. You're going to read a document together. So if you want a decision, you need to write a document. It's normally about 3 or 4 pages. You read it in silence together, and then you collectively discuss all of the information in the document, and you make a decision together.
But we talk about sort of productivity and the always on, sort of worker kind of thing. And you put forward this sort of position, actually, we need to behave more like monks. To be more sort of productive and things like that? Could you expand on that a bit? That
needs explanation. So my point there was that actually, if you ever look into when breakthroughs have happened, they very rarely happen on the back of what is sometimes described as shallow thinking. So shallow thinking, really easy to access. It's answering a quick email. It's going into a meeting and responding to something. Breakthroughs and good ideas very rarely happen in those scenarios. When you ask people to describe a scenario where a realization has struck them, it's normally an uncomfortable period of concentration. You've really had to focus on something, and it appears that creativity is often followed by those sort of periods of discomfort. And so the idea that any of us can dash out of a meeting, then have a good idea, then dash to answer emails is a bit of an illusion. It's a lie we tell ourselves. So someone said, well, if the idea that the best things that we do at work is accomplished with deep work, this period of concentration, and most of modern work is devoid of deep work, then is there any simple way to do it? And the best solution that someone suggested to me is setting aside maybe it's 60 minutes once a week or 90 minutes twice a week. He called it a monk mode morning, where you say, on Wednesdays, I'm going to be in at 11. Most diaries can accommodate things like that. I'm going to be in at 11. What I'm going to choose to do, though, is from the moment I would normally set about my commute, for 90 minutes, I'm going to sit at home and just focus on the most important thing I've got to do. If you actually conduct a piece of research into when people say they've had a good day at work, they generally describe a good day at work as when they've made progress in something meaningful. And, a live example of this, I've had something sitting on my to-do list for at least 3 months. It's a report from my boss. And I did it yesterday in 2 hours. It reached a point where it was getting so embarrassing, me not doing it. If it hit Christmas, my boss is American, actually. Whatever that Thanksgiving thing is. I thought if it hits Thanksgiving, then I'm in trouble. Anyway, it took me 2 hours. Monk mode, sort of focusing, achieving something. So I think, we live in a world of work that's built around shallow work, built about, the speed of interaction, trying to get back to people quickly. And what we've lost from that is any sort of reflective concentration.
And quick show, how many people get bored at work? Just quick show. Oh, right. Because obviously you've got some interesting things to say, actually, why boredom can be quite good.
Well, there's 2 parts to that. Number one, being bored at work is largely because we've been robbed of any agency. We've been robbed of any power to get things done. There's a really strange thing. Well, there's a human thing, that power is disinhibiting. I don't know if you observe this in... Did you ever see the press conference that Boris Johnson did with the Irish Taoiseach? And he started doing these remarkable exercises. Power is disinhibiting. With the things that we repress in ourselves, when we're in positions of power, those sort of limits have gone. But while power is disinhibiting, the absence of power is inhibiting. And so when we find ourselves in situations where we have no agency, we sort of repress our feelings, I always think of it, did your mum have a phone voice? My mum used to have a voice that was definitely about 5 or 6 postcodes posher than we actually were. Why? Because she wanted to restrict who she really was, so more people liked her in a workplace environment. Those things are definitely true. What we find ourselves doing all the time is we find ourselves sort of constraining, and so the reason why work is often boring for some of us is because we can't get anything done.
One of the issues you talk about is the mill owner. And sort of, why, is that something we should be avoiding as leaders in terms of turning into the equivalent of a historical mill owner? Could you expand a bit on that?
Yeah, the way I see this is that I set about trying to improve the culture of my work. And you might often find, I think there's almost 2 versions of culture. There's like macro culture and micro culture. So you often hear people saying, okay, so here's what we're going to do, here's our values, here's what happens. But the experience of most people in their jobs doesn't matter about the values that are put on the wall or the big policies that the big boss has changed. Most people's experience of their job is down to these microcultures, like what their boss is like, what the people around them behave like. What do people say when someone stands up to leave at 4 o'clock? Half day? Right, that's generally what happens, right?
Yeah.
And those microcultures, and the strange thing is that someone described it to me. He said, I think I'm one of the good guys, but inside of me there's an 18th century mill owner, often who pokes his head out. And so if people aren't back from lunch at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, wherever your lunch break is, he's like, where is everyone? If people aren't in at 9:30, he's like, people are taking the piss. And he says it's the 18th century mill owner who isn't seeing, so the one thing that's happened since the advent of email on mobile phone is the average working day has gone up by 2 hours a day. So the evil mill owner doesn't see you ruining your evening's TV, replying to an email, but they do see you sort of sneaking out the office embarrassed at 4:30 because you've got to go and pick someone up. And I think actually that's what's happened with modern work. Modern work is still filled with judgment, criticism, these sort of tiny little microaggressions that make what is already, half of all modern office workers are showing signs of burnout. It's really sort of the phenomenon of the last few years. Even higher in the NHS, even higher in teaching. But we've made it worse because we've allowed the email to sort of come into our working lives, but we haven't given ourselves a quid pro quo.
Right. Can we thank Bruce so much for being such an open interview? Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good idea.
Fantastic. Thank you.